Thanks, Robert. Am I coming through okay? I assume I am.
Yes.
Stop me. Okay. Turned off my VPN, so I should be good. Welcome to this installment of Snort 3 and Me. I'm calling this Rules Language 101. Again, I'm Alex Tatischeff. So I want to just say that we do have Patrick Mullen from Talos, who's going to be answering your questions during the presentation. And, he's the real expert. I consider myself kind of a beginner at Snort 3 rules. Now, I did teach the rules class at SourceFire for 5 years along with the other classes. So pretty familiar with how Snort 2 works, or how I thought it worked. And I found I was pretty much correct on how it works. But Snort 3, again, is kind of a new beast, and I've been learning a lot about it in the last few weeks and months, like probably a lot of you. So this is my presentation on rules. It's accurate as far as I know. So I'm learning along with all of you folks. So bear with me. And if I say something that Patrick ends up saying is wrong, then so be it. All right. Here's our agenda today. I'm going to do a real quick rule basics review. I mean, I say quick, I mean like 2 slides. So pretty quick on just so we have a foundation on what a rule is. And then we'll spend most of the time going over the Snort 3 language changes. So some of the highlights, I would say, of the new Snort 3 rules language. And then we'll do a rule conversion example will be the last part. So I'm going to take a Snort 2 rule, and I'm going to just run through how you might convert that from a Snort 2 to a Snort 3 rule. All right, rule basics. So basic rule syntax and usage. What is a rule? Well, when we say rule, we mean it's a specified set of keywords and arguments used as a matching criteria for traffic. You identify things like policy violations, known network attacks, evasion techniques, you name it, whatever you want to look for inside network traffic. And if it was Snort 2, I'd say whatever you want to look for inside packets. But with Snort 3, it's much more of a flow-based concept than a packet-based. So sure, network still consists of packets, but Snort 2 is kind of tied to the packets, and we've added a lot of things over the years to make sure it's application aware and flow aware. Snort 3 comes at it from a different perspective of being flow aware to start with. So I may say packets. Talos and company rather I said flows, so I'm going to try to keep that to flows when I'm talking about Snort 3, but that's what we're talking about, looking inside traffic for things. So the Snort device, sensor, or what do you want to call it, compares these flows against the conditions specified in the rule. And if the flow data matches all the conditions in the rules, the rule triggers. So there are multiple keywords in a rule typically. Doesn't have to be, but typically there's more than one. So typically there's several detection keywords in a rule. They all have to match. So everything in the rule is an and, there's no ors in Snort rules. One other thing about Snort rules, they're called signatures a lot, which is fine. It's kind of, when we would teach the class, we'd make sure that people understand the difference between signature-based detection and rule-based detection. And without going into it very deeply, a rule basically can look for conditions that exist that may facilitate a vulnerability or an exploit to be performed against a vulnerability. But by looking at those conditions, without looking at the specifics of the exact bytes needed, then that rule will work for multiple attacks against the vulnerability. That's what I like to call it a rule. Signature really means I'm looking for a specific thing. And you can write rules like that. You can write rules to look for just specific bytes, which is fine. But the point is, if the attack is modified a little bit, maybe 1 byte, rule won't work anymore, or the signature-based rule, I should say. So anyway, that's why I call these rules. It can get kind of confusing when you have a next generation firewall because they have rules too. So signatures actually ends up being a little bit easier way to understand what we're talking about. We're talking about Snort rules versus firewall rules. But all right, so my little soapbox there. Okay, this is my other slide on, again, Snort 2 rule reviews. This is the Snort 2 rule syntax. Should look pretty familiar to it if you've written any Snort rules. We have a rule header. There's several elements in those. I won't go into every one of those, but you have things like the action, source destination IPs and ports. And then there's a parentheses, and within the parentheses now is the rule body. And this is where things like the message, the detection keywords are located. Again, not going to go into a lot of detail there. We'll dive a lot more into the rules as we go on, but mostly Snort 3 flavors. But that's kind of a rule. It's got a header and a body, and it does some detection. Okay. What we've all been waiting for. What are some of the Snort 3 changes? Okay, here's my list of Snort 3 changes. So first of all, Snort 3 rules are easier to read, write, and verify. Now, initially, honestly, if you look at Snort 2 rules and you look at rules that have been converted by the Snort to Lua utility, which you can use, of course, on your configuration files as well as your rules. If you look at those two rules, you may be hard pressed to find a difference. You look at the rule and go, geez, it looks just like a Snort 2 rule. And honestly, some of those conversions may be almost exactly like Snort 2 rules, depending on the keywords that are in those. But while the initial conversion of the rule might look the same, the Snort 3 language gives you the ability now to write rules in a much more readable format, which we'll see going forward. So they are definitely easier to read, write, and verify once you start actually taking advantage of all the features within that Snort 3 language. There is consistent use of comma and semicolon. It's not consistent in Snort 2, and I'll show you examples of that. There is service matching criteria. Now, this is something if you've been using the Firepower system or the Cisco Secure Firewall in the past, we've had service matching criteria for years, since version 5, actually, of the firewall back at SourceFire. We had a service keyword, but nobody else did. It didn't work in open source Snort. Now, open source Snort has that. That's big. Yeah, that's pretty big. That gives the capability to rule writers. It just wasn't there before unless you had the commercial product. Header networks and ports are optional. Wow, that's interesting. That's weird. Okay, we'll talk about that coming up. Additional rule actions. So we have some new actions, new keywords that you can use in the actions as well as within the body. There are more sticky buffers. So sticky buffers was a concept introduced a few years ago with the file data and the packet data keywords. I think are the only two ones in Snort 2 that I can think of. There are just a ton of sticky buffers or sticky keywords now in Snort 3. They just went all whole hog. Patrick, they went whole hog into the sticky keywords. Sorry, I wasn't planning on that one. Okay. There are also new buffers and other rule options. So not just more sticky buffers, there are actually new buffers you can look in, and we'll talk about that. And of course, Snort to Lua, I mentioned that already. That will convert your 2.9 rules to the 3x format to ease adoption. So if you have a Snort 2 rule set you've created, you just run it through Snort to Lua. For the most part, and I'm not going to get into nuances where it doesn't work perfectly, because it works for the most part almost 100% of the time. It will convert your rules over to Snort 3 and they'll just work. All right, so let's talk about some of those things. How about that? Consistent syntax, comma, and semicolon. Okay, so let's look at some Snort 2 examples. So you have keywords like the flow keyword, very common. Okay, you'll see this in nearly every Talos rule and hopefully nearly every one of your rules. It's saying this is looking for a flow in a particular direction. So you have the flow keyword, you have two parameters, they're comma separated. That's what that looks like in Snort 2. Same thing for byte test. We have a keyword and we have comma separated parameters after it. So it makes sense, right? Content keyword, a little different. So the content keyword, we have semicolons separating the parameters there. So sometimes in Snort 2, commas are used to separate parameters, and sometimes the semicolon is used. So that's not real consistent. And once you understand that, that's okay. But it's kind of weird to look at that content keyword and see just a bunch of keywords strung together and try to understand that everything after evil in that line, it basically modifies that previous content check. So offset, depth, no case, HTTP, those kind of all look back and modify that previous keyword. In Snort 3, let's see what it looks like. So Snort 3, let's take that same flow keyword. It looks the same. So does the byte test keyword. So this is what I mean when I say that, well, we've said before, actually, I haven't said it this time. If you know Snort 2 rules, you'll really have a problem understanding Snort 3 rules. They're probably easier, if anything. They're not harder. So, and some of the keywords like these are just not changed. And I think there might be some more byte test options. I'm not positive on that one, but at least they're written the same way, right? There are comma separated parameters. Now in Snort 3, the content check looks like that too. So again, just consistent. So now we're saying there's a keyword with a colon, then there are comma separated parameters. So change those semicolons to commas. Not only that, okay, semicolon now always means the rule separate end of the keyword. The comma is a parameter, and the colon. So previously, again, in content mesh, there were colons within the parameters too, which could be a little bit confusing. Now the colon is really only just to say, here's a keyword, colon. Here are the parameters. If you notice the offset and depth, they just have spaces between the offset and depth and the number rather than a colon there. So those are, again, consistent syntax. things are a little easier to read for someone who just doesn't have years of Snort 3 or Snort 2 experience. Service matching. Okay, so this is pretty cool. So in Snort 2, if you look at the Talos rules that you get, they pretty much all include this metadata service keyword, or most of them, not every single one, but many, if not well, most, use that metadata service keyword. Now, the thing about metadata keywords is they're ignored by open source Snort. They're only used by some additional components that are present in the Cisco secure firewall, or again, Firepower used to be. So the commercial system, they're ignored. Everything in the metadata field is just, Snort just goes, whatever. Put whatever you want in there. I don't care. The firewall, though, does look at that. And it's kind of a little bit of a misnomer because metadata means information about something else. So metadata really means information about the rule. And technically, it really shouldn't have detection keywords inside a field called metadata. But that's where we put it. It's been working okay in Snort 2. It's just a little kind of inconsistent, again, syntax-wise. Snort 3 now has a new service keyword. So there's a new keyword called service that brings that same capability into Snort 3 open source. So that, again, something new we just didn't have before. Instead of ignoring those metadata keywords, now you can use those. What are the service keywords? So these are, I don't think these have changed. There may be one or two new ones in here. I don't call for 100%. I think I did add a couple actually for Snort 3. But most of these actually were already present in, if you had to get in the commercial system, you could use these in the metadata service fields. But now you can use these in the service field in Snort 3. So this is something you can see, again, typically if you look inside a Linux Unix system, the services file, this is the kind of services we're talking about. When we say services, that's what we're talking about. So as you can see, those are ways to tie the rule to a service, again, ignoring things like the ports and addresses, things like that, to say this rule works for this service. Here's a Snort 2 example again, going back to the commercial. This is how you look in your Snort 2 rules that you get from Talos and you run those on your Snort system. They'll look just like this, but again, Snort's going to ignore that. But you can see the metadata keyword there. So the metadata's got some things in it about the rule, like the policy. So got the state and the balanced IPS policy set to drop, and this one the max detect is drop, security is drop, and those actually are used not only by the commercial system. If you have something like pulled pork, for instance, and you say I want to use the balanced rule set, it'll actually look at this metadata and use that, and that's fine. But again, those are not detection keywords. But you notice at the end there is a service HTTP keyword that actually is a detection keyword, going to change how the rule works. So again, that's Snort 2. Again, Snort 2 is going to ignore that orange part unless it's the commercial system. Again, it's a keyword parameter in the metadata. As I said, secure firewall open. Here's a Snort 3 example, and as you can see, we have the same metadata. So the rule hasn't been changed. This rule's been run through the Snort to Lua converter is all. And I think I put some character strings in it to make it easier to read. So I put I put a keyword on a line there. So, but you can see now that the service keyword is pulled out. It's its own separate keyword. So this is a Snort 3 rule. It works in open source, and it is now service aware, unlike, again, Snort 2. So this new service keyword works anywhere. Works, as far as I know, anywhere Snort 3 is. I don't think there's anything special you have to make this work. Okay, the rule header. I said that header IPs and ports are optional. That's interesting. What does that mean? Well, here's a rule header, right? So typically, it's the top of the rule. We saw this already. It's got the protocol. This is again for TCP. It's got an IP address. So there's a source and destination IPs. We have two variables there, external net and home net. And we have the ports. So this rule is designed to look for traffic coming from outside your network or some untrusted network on an HTTP port, which is a long list of ports you'd see HTTP on, to your internal network on any port. Okay, great. What does it look like in Snort 3? Well, it can look just the same way on Snort 3, or you can replace that with alert HTTP. So in this case, we don't need any of the protocol. We don't need the source destination ports. In fact, we'll see later, we don't even need that metadata service keyword anymore because we put that in the header. But I can get a little bit ahead of myself there. But the point there is, look, you can put a service in the header. So the service keywords we saw before, you can put those in the header. So Now, some might say, but now it's not directional anymore. And yeah, that's true. It's not just looking for traffic coming from external to internal, but if the rule is written well enough to avoid false positives from the beginning, then that will probably work anyway. Now, you may have some rules that you really want to have that directionality, and you might want to leave that old rule header in there. But if the rule is written well enough where it's not going to false positive on traffic going in the wrong direction, that's a pretty cool option for a keyword for a header. All right, rule actions. More and more. Okay, so some of the rule actions in Snort 3. Pass. So stop evaluating subsequent rules against the packet. Now, that's not changed from Snort 2. Now pass rules are kind of like a loaded gun you can shoot yourself in the foot with, because if a rule matches, if traffic, packets, or flows match a pass rule, they will ignore the rest of the rule set. And pass rules by default are sorted at the top of the rule set. So they're always going to hit those first. If a packet or flow hits one of those, it's going to skip all the rest of the rules. So that's important to understand. And you don't want to make sure you don't introduce security holes with a pass rule. There are some reasons to use a pass rule, but anyway, pass hasn't changed from Snort 2 to 3. Alert, same thing. Alert hasn't changed either. Alert means this is a generate only. Now, it's actually better in Snort 3, again, more consistent. When we say alert in Snort 3, we mean just alert. We mean don't do anything else to the packet. Now, in Snort 2, alert means more than just that. It can. So I'll go into that in a second here. Now, block is a little different. So block is a keyword that did not exist in Snort 2. So Snort 3 has a keyword called block. It is the same as the drop keyword in Snort 2. It means drop the packet, block the remainder of that session. Okay, so this is, we found some evil. We're going to drop the evil packet and not allow the rest of the session to proceed. So we don't have to drop, you're not going to drop one packet and let everything else go through, just, kill the session. That's the same way it works in Snort 2. So the equivalent keyword for drop in Snort 3 is block. Now, Snort 3 also has a drop keyword. The drop keyword in Snort 3 means just drop the packet. Now, we didn't have this option in Snort 2. So if you have a condition where you only want to drop an offending packet out of a flow, you can do that. And it might be more than a packet. Again, Snort 3 is not packet-based. There may be a couple more datagrams in there, but basically you're going to drop a portion of the flow and not the whole flow. Now, again, similar to pass, I struggle to find a use case for this. I'm sure there are some, obviously, when you put it in there. But be careful with this. Don't assume that drop is drop. Drop is blocked. So the ones you had set to drop in Snort 2, you probably want to set those to block in Snort 3. Because generally, if there's evil, it's all evil, right? But again, it gives you that option where you can drop just the offending packet out of the flow and not terminate the entire flow. Okay, rewrite. Okay, this is a new one, and if you use the replace option in the body of a rule, now in Snort 2, it replaces a content modifier, so you can actually do a content check, look for some content, and then replace that content in the packet and send the packet on its way. In Snort 2, that's just an alert rule. It's just an alert rule, but you put replace in the content check, it'll actually change the packet. Again, a little inconsistent because we said it was an alert rule, but now you're changing the packet. So in Snort 3, we don't call it an alert rule, we call it a rewrite rule. So the action has to be set to rewrite for that rewrite to take place, for that change to take place. React is another example. So React is a keyword in Snort 2, where again, you'd have alert action. Inside the rule, you have a React. I'm not sure if it's React exactly. I think something like that. Reset. So it would send a TCP reset or an ICMP port or reachable out in response to an event. So the idea there is you have a passive device. It's not actually inline the flow of traffic. You can have some impact on the traffic by sending resets out when you find something evil. But again, in Snort 2, that would be an alert rule with those keywords in the rule to do that. In Snort 3, that's a React rule. Sorry, sorry, that's not the right word. I'm talking about reject. So everything I just said, sorry, is reject. I know that's an HTML. I'll get back to React. Everything I just said is for reject. So reject is that TCP reset or ICMP port or reachable. Okay, so that's reject. Back up to React. React is actually, again, another new keyword, and that will send an HTML block response page, which you can configure in your config file. So if you have a rule that's dealing with something in HTTP and you want to send a page to your internal person, right? You don't have this for an inbound rule. in response, then you can use the react keyword. Now, again, this is something that was available in, and still is, in the Cisco secure firewall and firepower systems. And it was actually Snort doing it, but it was a capability we didn't expose to open source Snort. So now it is. So use that react keyword for HTML. Again, the reject keyword you would use if you wanted to do those TCP resets. So react is new. That wasn't there before. Reject and rewrite were part of alert before. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But those are some new rule actions in Snort 3. So I talked about sticky buffers already a little bit, just mentioned those. These are the sticky buffers available now in Snort 3. I told you there's a bunch. There's a bunch. If you notice, there's 2 down there on the right to the last span. Those are the ones that I think those are the ones I'm aware of that are sticky keywords in Snort 2. So, and you'll see a ton of rules from Talos anyway that have file data in them. I don't know if we have any rules that have packet data, but file data is a real common keyword for anything that's a response, HTTP or an SMTP response. You're going to see file data in it that does a normalization. It looks at the normalized buffer there, but ton more sticky buffers now. You can see all those HTTP keywords are now sticky buffers, right? They were just content modifiers before, but now they're sticky keywords. The vast majority are HTTP, as you can see. All right. So in addition, there's more. You can now narrow the search even further. So some of those sticky buffers we saw have additional options. So this can improve the speed and accuracy. So we're not just looking, we're going to narrow down the search to even a smaller portion of the packet and make Snort even that more efficient and that more accurate. One of those is the HTTP header field. So in Snort 2, and of course in Snort 3, if you don't use this additional modifier, you can limit the search to just the HTTP header. But you can also use this field keyword to look at a particular field in the header. So in this case, this keyword HTTP header field content language is going to constrain that search to just the content dash language, or the language field of the HTTP header. So if there's something you want to look for that's in that field, then you can use this keyword to tell Snort only look in this particular field for that data. So again, anything you can do to make your rule more specific and more accurate makes it faster and less chance of false positives. Another one is HTTP URI. Now, in the header, the fields are fairly straightforward. They're well defined, right? They're well defined in RFCs or just HTTP documentation. I don't know if the URI has that many, is split up that way. This may be something you have to go to the Snort documentation to understand what actually is available within the HTTP URI. One of those attributes is path. So you could say, I want to look in the HTTP URI. I only want to look in the path portion of the URI and look for this. There are other fields within the URI as well. Again, but you have to look in the documentation to find out what all those are. But you can narrow those down again further as well. By the way, let me just mention too, it's kind of early because we haven't seen a lot of Snort rules, 3 rules from Talos, but one of my best sources of understanding the best way to write rules for Snort 2 has been looking at the rules. You look at the documentation, great, that's fine, absolutely. User manual is very important. But if I want to really understand how to write good rules, I look at Talos rules. And if I see something, I go, interesting. Why did they do it that way? Or why did they put the rules options in that order? And they do it for a reason. And if you understand what that is, it really can help you write better rules. Just watching how the experts, if you will, write the rules. Okay, I'm just going to go over some random keywords I found that are kind of cool. One's the rem keyword. So you can put comments within rules in Snort 3. And this is something that's kind of frustrated me in the past with Snort 2 is if I want to comment in a rule, how do I do that? You can't. I mean, in open source, you can actually use the metadata field, as I mentioned, because metadata is really ignored by Snort. So you actually could use that for comments, but it's I won't say it's a kludge, but it's interesting. I mean, it's not what it's made for, but you could do that. You use the metadata field with the comments in it. But now you have your own field for it. Rem. Wow, it sounds like basic, right? So you can use the rem keyword, rem colon, quote, put your comments in the middle of the rule. It's just a keyword that goes in a rule, and Snort doesn't care, right? It's not going to obviously execute anything in there. It's just used for you to comment the rule. So that's kind of cool. Another one is the app IDs keyword. So we talked about services already. So you have those, you can use those in the rule header, but there's also an app IDs keyword. And there are thousands of applications you can put in there. So here's an example. If you're getting, remember, this is open source Snort. It's not the product. So you can actually write a rule to look for. In this case, I said, learn on the Googles. So I put in there Google, Google Drive, Google App Engine. Let's use those as examples. There are several thousand service or applications you can use in there. So if you want your rule to work for a specific application, you can put that in the rule as well now. A couple more keyword examples. Again, this is not exhaustive. I just threw a few in here so we can get some examples. The Regex. So Regex is a hyperscan-enabled PCRE, and I'll talk a lot more about that when we get to the rule conversion part. But it is, I haven't found what isn't in there actually, but it's not 100% Regex like PCRE, but it's almost. I mean, it's going to have pretty much most everything most people will need for a Regex expression within a rule. And it uses the Hyperscan engine, which is our library, which is available on an Intel processor. So if you compile Snort with this Hyperscan support and you run it on a Hyperscan supported processor, Intel based, you will gain some performance enhancements by using the Regex keyword. And we'll talk more about that coming up. Sensitive data filtering. So again, this is something that's been available in the commercial product. It is now exposed to open source, and you have an SD pattern keyword. You can look for things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, email addresses, or your own custom patterns. If you're in SCADA systems, there's a new IC 104 inspector. There's a couple keywords that come with that for those control systems. Again, this is not a complete listing of the new keywords. It's just, I just threw some examples in here. Okay, so that's my quick run through of some of the new features in Snort 3. Let's look at a rule conversion example. So I'm going to start with a sample Snort 2 rule here. And let's take a look at what this rule does. So you look at the rule header, it's designed for outbound web traffic, right? So it's TCP from your home net or protected network on any port to the external net on protected network on HTTP port. So it's somebody inside your network firing up a browser going somewhere outside, right? Pretty straightforward. It's looking for traffic to the server. So for the top header talks about the connection initiation or the packet direction, which way is the packet going. This one is showing, all right, what flow is this? Is this the traffic going to the server or is it going to the client? You can actually use from server, from client in there as well. So in that flow, which is going from home net to external net, we only care about traffic that's going to the server, I mean outbound. The content checks in this rule are really only there because there's 3 content checks followed by a PCRE keyword. The content checks are only there to pre-qualify the packets and to populate the fast pattern matcher, which I'm not going to go into the fast pattern matcher in detail here because the rules class is like 3 or 4 days. So it takes a while to go through all these things, but let's just say the fast pattern matcher is pretty darn important and the PCRE can't populate it. So what those content checks do is one of them populates the fast pattern matcher. That was I believe, the first one there because it's the longest. And what they do is they just pre-qualify that packet to make sure it's really close to the packet we want before we get down to the PCRE, which does the real work. So, and they're there because PCRE is it's a poor performing keyword. Let's put it that way. It is. I mean, Regex is full capabilities, but you pay for that with the performance. So in Snort 2, what we try to do pretty much without fail is have 1 or 2 or multiple content checks in front of the PCRE to make sure that we disqualify packets as much as possible from actually going and being evaluated by that PCRE keyword. And of course, the PCRE keyword in this case does the real work. And if you look back between the content checks and the PCRE, it kind of looks like they're doing the same thing. And they are, a lot of it. But the PCRE actually does some additional checks to make sure, for instance, there's no carriage returns and line feeds within the URI, things like that. So to make sure that we really do have a packet that represents the condition we're looking for. Okay, so when we convert this rule, so there's a rule at the top in gray. That's the one that we just saw. If you run it through the Snort to Lua utility, and I put two ways to do that down on the bottom, you can run the command line is basically Snort to Lua minus C, your input rule file, minus R, your output rule file. So you run it, convert your Snort 2 rules to Snort 3. If you did this one rule, it would convert to the rule in the black below. On the Cisco Secure Firewall, on your FMC or Firewall Management Center, you go to Objects, Intrusion Rules, Snort 3 All Rules, and you can import those rules there on that page in version 7, which is the first version that supports Snort 3. Okay, so the conversion looks like this. Now, again, if you just look at this rule on the surface, you might go, gee, it looks kind of like a Snort 2 rule, right? Well, it does, but it's not. So what are some of the differences? So first of all, we're using this HTTP URI sticky keyword now. If you look at the content checks above, after every content check, you'll see there's an HTTP URI keyword. Whereas on the rule below, it's only in the rule once. So it's in the rule once, right after the flow keyword, before all those content keywords. And that says all the rest of the content and the regex and the PCRE all look in this whatever the sticky keyword is, in this case, HTTP URI. So that's one change there. And as we mentioned before, the content checks now, we don't have with distance or within, but we do have a no case parameter there, which above that's separated by a semicolon, below in Snort 3 is separated by a comma. I mentioned the sticky keyword, it impacts content checks and PCREs. So we don't need the big, not the big, but the capital U. So in the PCRE above, there's a slash uppercase U as a parameter, which tells it to look in the URI. You don't need that anymore. It's not available actually in Snort 3 because that's what I have sticky keywords for. And of course, the service keyword. Now in the rule above, it's a metadata service. So it's only going to work for the product, the secure firewall. But below, it's its own keyword, which means it works everywhere. So those are the changes in this particular rule from running it just through the Snort conversion. So it made it so it works in Snort 3. It didn't do anything else to the rule to make it better or worse or whatever. It just changed it. So now it works. So the top rule would not work in Snort 3. The bottom one will. Okay, now what I'm calling stage 2 is let's go beyond the automated. Let's go in and edit some of these rules ourselves, take advantage of some of these Snort 3 features and make them better. So what we've done here is I went ahead and said, you know what? I think this rule is accurate enough that I don't need to have all that source, destination, external stuff. I'm going to replace that with just alert HTTP because it's easier and it's simpler. It's easier to read, easier to maintain. I mean, let's just face it, it's simpler. So I've changed the rule header to HTTP instead of the external ports. Because I did that, I don't need that service keyword. It's pointing there to a blank spot in the rule. So above, I have this metadata service, or even my auto-converted rule, I have the service keyword. I don't need that now. So check it out. I don't think it hurts anything, but there's no reason to put keywords in that aren't needed, right? So we said alert HTTP in the header. That means service HTTP as well. I put comments in. So you saw the rem keyword before. Excuse me. This is another way to do comments. So you can do, sorry, I inhaled some water. But you can do C-style comments within the rule. So here I have slash star, the comment, and star slash. So you can actually put multi-line comments in if you want to do it that way. But instead of using the rem keyword, I used those C-style comments within the rule. Excuse me. Arbitrary white space, no backslashes. So to me, this is probably one of the things that makes the rule the most readable. And that is, so in the rule above, if I told you there are 3 content checks in it, you'd say, okay, hold on, let me check. So you have to go through the rule and, parse it and go, oh, there's one, there's another one. Oh, okay, there's 3. Okay. But the rule below, if I tell you 3 content checks in, it's like, oh yeah, boom, 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 because they're right on top of each other. So by taking advantage of the fact that in Snort 3, arbitrary white space, you don't have to worry about backslashing these end of the lines, which you'd have to do in Snort 2. You can just put a keyword in every line. So it now begins looking a lot more like code, right? So you got the little parentheses at the top saying, okay, here's the beginning of the rule body. We have the body, each keyword on its own line. Again, tons easier to read. So when they say that Snort 3 rules are easier to read, It doesn't mean they're easy to read out of the box. It doesn't mean running it through a conversion all of a sudden makes it easier to read, but it means that you can write rules like this, which I don't think it's just me. They're easier to read, right? It's easier to see what's in that rule. Okay, so that was stage 2. Now, go back to stage 2 real quick. So I didn't really change anything about what the rule does here. It still looks in HTTP/RI. It still has the 3 content checks as well as the PCRE. Okay, I just kind of cleaned it up, made it so it works in Snort 3, made it easier to read. In stage 3, I've done more. So what I've done here, and this is where I'm going to slow down a little bit, talk about some of these keywords like regex. What I've done here is I made some pretty big changes to the rule. So first of all, I took out all the content checks. So they're just not there anymore. Now, let me just stop and say, I'm not saying everybody should do this, right? And I did a lot of testing last week on this to understand what, just in my lab anyway, or my home network, what the performance implications are to doing something like this. And honestly, my testing was very limited. And let me just say that you should all be testing these rules using the rule performance profiling, which of course is still there in Snort 3, and understanding how your rules are performing compared to where they were before. Even you can leave the old rule in there, your new version of the rules, see how they perform, because that's very important to understand how these rules are going to perform on your network. But this is something you could do. So you could actually take out those content checks, which again are only there because the PCRI keyword was not very efficient, and you can use regex instead. So in my testing, again, very, very limited, just my testing, I found that regex keywords about 30% faster than PCRE. So just on the surface, a little bit faster. So not a ton faster. So if that's all that was there, I probably wouldn't take out these content checks because I still want this rule to be really fast, and just 30% faster than PCRE, maybe not that great. But the regex keyword is there. And again, if you have that hyperscan library and you're using it on a Snort version that was compiled with those options, and you're using it on an Intel platform, you have that performance boost from regex. This is huge though. Regex has, no case, that's not huge. That's just same as the /I on PCRE. This is huge. So no case makes it case insensitive because again, it's not full regex. We're not using the / all the regex parameters. We have different parameters such as no case instead. But regex uses the fast pattern matcher. And again, without going into too much detail on the fast pattern matcher, it's huge. It's one of the main benefits you get out of using those content checks ahead of the PCRE is populating that fast pattern matcher, which is there really to disqualify packets from further inspection. So by putting this in the fast pattern matcher, we've actually done a lot of what those content checks did before. And again, in my testing, a rule like this with regex, sure, the regex is 30% faster, but when you add the fast pattern keyword in there, you end up with a rule that's nearly as fast as the one above. And again, your mileage may vary, test, find out how that's going to work on your network. But if you could write rules like this, again, much simpler. I think you're paying a small performance penalty, maybe, which you're probably getting that back, maybe even with some of the other Snort 3 performance. Again, too early to tell for sure. But these are options you can use. So again, all this requires, there are a lot of dependencies for these things to work. I'm just throwing these out as ideas you could try. I'm not saying go replace all your PCREs with regex and take out all your content checks. But it is something that you can look into, start experimenting with. If you find this works, hey, use it. If you have the right, if you're using this on an ARM system, ARM processor, regex will give you the fast pattern matcher. It won't give you any performance benefit. You're paying the same here you would with the PCRE as far as performance. You still get the fast pattern, so your performance gains won't be as good. So okay, regex uses fast pattern. So there's my final rule conversion. And again, you don't have to go to stage 3 like I did here. You can go to stop at stage 2 and kind of leave those conventional keywords in there, if you will, for now. But this is something I would encourage you folks to start looking into if you haven't already, and try to understand, do your own testing, use that Snort rule performance profiling, and understand what these changes, what the effects they have on the rules. Now, accuracy-wise, it better be just accurate. I mean, everything I've shown here should give you the same detection value. You're not going to ever, miss a packet you would have seen with Snort 2. It really comes down to kind of the performance and how much can you do to simplify the rule, but still maintain the performance you need out of your system. All right. That's my overview on Snort Rules 101. So my advice for continuing, so obviously use Snort to Lua for your initial conversion. If you want to use Snort 2 rules and Snort 3, just run through Snort to Lua. They'll just work. Don't forget www.snort.org. That's your main source of documentation for Snort 3. GitHub as well. If you go out there's some things you might not be able to find in the manual. You can go look in the source code comments and find them in there. I did that, and I don't even know C. So C+. So review the rules and update as needed. Again, so once you've done that conversion, go look through the rules and make sure they're good. Maybe make some other changes, put those character returns in there to make them easier to read. Look at those new service options for your new rules. Now you have those. Look into those. Where would you use those? Now, again, the metadata is just going to be turned into service. It's just going to work. But if you have other ones you want to add those service options for, look into those. Refine those buffers, right? You have those additional buffers now. So if you've got rules that look in the HTTP URI at specific fields, start using those additional values in those sticky keywords to narrow that search down to those specific fields. Again, take advantage of that arbitrary white space you talked about online. Take advantage of comments. Make your rules easier to read. And test, like I said, test, right? Everything I say is my own experience in the last few weeks looking over Snort 3, asking folks like Patrick at Talos, say, if I got this right, and I didn't get it all right. So, I think I got everything in this one right, and they've looked over it, and hopefully that didn't miss anything. But yeah, you have to test this, and I'll go down that journey with you, and I'll discover Snort 3 together. So that is my spiel for today. I don't know what we've got for comments. If you want to bring any, answer any online, or if they have all been answered in the chat. Robert, back to you.
Looks like, thanks. Alex, as always, yeah, a great job. Well done. Thank you for that. And I think we've got most of the questions answered here. And again, folks, this is a security discussion. You don't always want to publish your questions in a public forum that's going to be recorded and reviewed on YouTube, as this is going to be. So feel free to send a note directly to me, RALBACH at cisco.com, and that's actually chat. I want Patrick, if you have anything you want to comment or say.
Correct. Anything you want to correct, Patrick? What did I say wrong?
Yeah, correct anything.
Right now, I'm not afraid.
Actually, it was fantastic. Thank you. The only thing I added was in chat there were more buffers that's used. Sticky buffers in Snort 2, and those were carried through to Snort 3. Anything that ends in underscore data, so base64 data, SIP data, ECRPC data was another one. And basically what that does is it shows that over the 15, 20 years that we were using Snort 2, the rules language evolved. And you can see how things got easier over time, and Snort 3 is a huge beneficiary of that, where after learning the wonders that is sticky buffers and how it makes it easier to write rules and also to even make the rule options work better, all that stuff that we learned from that regarding rules languages, also even the configuration, all got carried to Snort 3. So one of the main goals of Snort 3 was to basically keep it so that it would be familiar to people who were used to Snort 2, but to learn the lessons of the past and make things just better. And here in Talos, we're super excited about that. Obviously, with the rules language and sticky buffers, it makes the rules easier to read, easier to teach, easier to maintain, but also all the infrastructure stuff regarding configuration and how all that's handled is making our lives so much easier. So we're very excited.
Yeah.
We look forward to people joining us in this journey and helping Snort take over the world.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well done. Folks, so just a quick comment regarding to the next session. We'll be going a little bit deeper. Hard to believe that there's actually more potential depth that could be discussed. And also, if you've got favorite rules that you want to understand what might need to be done with regards to optimizing those, we're considering having a sort of an office hour scenario, as in, like, bring your fave rule and let's see what might be done about it. We'd like to get those in advance if possible. So again, you'll look for that invite. And if you've got comments, invite your friends. And we hope that we'll see you again next time.